This is your second and final lecture on Sanatana Dharma, a religion better known as Hinduism.
Okay, as we continue in Sanatana Dharma, or the Hindu tradition, it's very important that you have a good definition for the term puja. Puja is in italics on the first bullet, and puja is best translated as worship. So a Hindu person will have a statue of a god or goddess, either in a town square or a village, or even in his or her own home. And the primary act of worship for Bhakti Yoga, which is again from last lecture, the largest school of yoga, we have the idea of bringing flowers or food or a drink to the god or goddess. So this puja, dedication to the god or goddess, very important part of the Hindu religion. Fasting, which is going without food, which demonstrates the connection for Hindu life between the physical and the spiritual. As you deprive the physical body of something that it needs, you call upon the god or goddess to fill that physical hunger with spiritual food. And going on pilgrimages is also common practice for Hindu people, going to a place that is considered especially holy or sacred. Giving you a picture of one such place here. This is the Amarnath Cavern, and it is a popular place to make a pilgrimage to because of the sexual imagery that you would find there. You have to understand that Eastern cultures tend to be much more comfortable in talking about human sexuality than Western cultures. I'm not quite sure if that's because of some of the puritanical influences that we've had in Western religion, but Hindus understand human sexuality is a very natural thing, and because they have great reverence for nature. This is nothing that conjures up images of shame or guilt, but sexuality is something to be something to be celebrated. And so, whenever in nature a Hindu observes a lingam and a yoni, which is two particular symbols coming together, that is considered again especially sacred or holy. And so, the lingam is what we would refer to as a phallic symbol, and yoni is a vulva symbol. And so this is male and female coming together in nature, and you have that with the stalagmite as the lingam or phallic symbol here, and the opening of the cave, of course, is the vulva for the female sexuality. And with that said, it's not just reverence for nature at a cavern like Amarnath, but all rivers are considered especially sacred and holy, as you'll see with the as you saw last week with the celebration of Kumbh Mela as one of the primary holy days. Okay, many of you may have heard of the caste system of India before, although it's not widely practiced today. For centuries, this was the primary way that Hindu society was structured, and the caste system is composed of 4 different classes of people. Pictured on the top left is the highest caste. This is the Brahmins. They are the priests and other religious leaders, and certainly the gurus that are the religious teachers, that an individual would subscribe to a guru's teaching. And then at the top right, you have the military leader here, and it would also include nobility or royalty as part of the Kshatriya caste. This caste is going to be really important in our next 2 religions also, because the primary leader of the religion referred to as Jain Dharma, and then also Siddhartha Gautama of Buddha Dharma, both were born into Hindu culture as part of this Kshatriya caste. And then the Vaishyas are the 3rd caste, and these are your farmers, ranchers, and merchants, pictured at the bottom left. And at the bottom right, we have the lowest of the caste, the Shudras, which are the manual laborers. And then below the 4 castes, there is a group of people that were considered so disdainful that they're not even given a caste name, but they are simply referred to as the untouchables. And these are homeless individuals, and it is or was believed within Hindu society that they must have behaved so badly and had such awful karma in a previous life that they were reincarnated to this lowest form of humanity, barely even referred to as humanity. Mahatma Gandhi did much to overcome the prejudice against the untouchables. He referred to them rather than outcasts as the very children of God. Now, I believe your textbook makes some reference to that. Again, because of acts of government and practices of religious and societal freedom that have taken place in Indian government, we see the caste system has heavily been phased out, but because it is so ingrained within Hindu history, it certainly still carries some influence in that culture. Okay, now don't worry too much here as you see four really strange looking words in italics. These are the four stages of life, and the reason you don't need to worry is because you're only going to be responsible for the fourth and final stage. So I'll remind you that when we get down to the bottom of the slide. But I do want you to have a general understanding of these life stages, but again, you don't have to know the names of the first three. From the time, and this is again, it's patriarchal society, so these stages are only referring to a man's life. The first stage, from birth to age 25, the Brahmakran, is when a baby, then a toddler, then a boy, a teenager, and then a young man commits himself to the teachings of a guru, and also commits himself to celibacy, that sexual attraction, sexual activity should not be a distraction to him during this time in life. And so he commits himself to celibacy so he can be a student and learn the ways of Hinduism. And then what we in Western culture would refer to as the most prosperous time of life comes at the Grihastha stage, and from age 26 to 50. This is when a man works in his particular vocation, hopefully makes a good living, and is able to provide a home for his wife if he chooses to be married, and of course the children if they have children, which would normally be expected. Again, this is a time of life of prosperity. And then after the children are grown and leave the house, and the man has reached age 51, for this third quarter of his life, he returns back to the things that he was taught in that very first stage of life. And here at the Vanaprastha stage, he does stay at the home with his wife, but he now, for the most part, lives in retirement and commits himself to meditation and study. And then, if the man makes it to age 75, the Hindu expectation would be, and this is the one that you do need to be ready for on exam day, the sannyasin is the final stage of life, from 75 until death and reincarnation. And here, the Hindu man leaves his home behind, and he lives out in the wilderness or out in the forest, many times committed to nakedness, fasting, and prayer. If his wife is still living, the hope is that the family, the grown children or other family members will take care of her, because again, this is the old Hindu man living his life completely dependent on God, goddesses, and nature. And in showing this commitment to the gods, the hope is that so much good karma would be built up that he will either be reincarnated as a higher being, or he perhaps could even achieve moksha, which that's from last lecture, that liberation, that freeing of the Atman, the soul. Okay, we do have some societal tensions that come with the religious identity here, but not as much as we see within other cultures. There are going to be two new religions, Jain Dharma and Buddha Dharma, that emerge in northeast India. Of course, Sanatana Dharma is coming out of northwest India. And these other two religions of Jain Dharma and Buddha Dharma, just like Sanatana Dharma, or Hinduism, stresses the virtue of pacifism or nonviolence. And so Jains, Buddhists, and Hindus were able to live together with a relative peace. And even when the Muslims first came into India in the 7th century of the Common Era, or AD, the Muslims did not come into India with the spirit of conquest. They were not an imperial threat early on. But eventually, as the Muslim identity does become more and more imperial, and we see it married to the Mughal Empire, we do see that there are a number of tensions in northwest India between Muslims and Hindus. It's a very violent history. And much in gratitude to the work of Mahatma Gandhi, there is some, or I can't say relative peace, there is greater peace, though, today than there have been in previous decades. One of the actions of Gandhi that is considered quite controversial by many is that he helped establish a border in northwest India that established a new nation, a nation that you've probably heard about a lot in the news, Pakistan. And so Pakistan is a Muslim nation neighboring the Hindu nation of India. And then lastly, Hindus also had a complicated relationship with European Christians stemming back to the 19th century, when Western, even prior to the 19th century, but it reached its apex in the 1800s, we had Western Europeans colonize India, Africa, and much of South America. And of course, most of you know with colonialism, this is a small group of people who have great military power moving in and taking over another area for the sake of economic prosperity. Not to move into the area to cause the indigenous people to move away. They're actually oftentimes used as slave labor, as you can see in this picture, some Indian men carrying around a British military officer. But colonization is, again, having the military power to take over an area with a relatively small group of people so that you can bring about greater economic prosperity for your own people, and oftentimes very much at the detriment for the indigenous people already living there. Okay, and then we need to remember that Sanatana Dharma is one of our most pluralistic religions that we have today, believing that there are many paths to salvation. Pictured here at the top right is a cartoon that is related to a parable that you can have down in your notes as the parable of the elephant and the blind man. And one day, a Hindu guru discovers several blind men arguing with one another over what is truth. And they're all convinced that they know what truth is, and the other men that they're discussing the concept of truth with are completely off. And so the guru decides to teach these blind men a lesson. And he takes them out to the town square. He places an object before them, and he tells all of them to use their hands to touch the object, and then therefore they'll be able to tell him what it is they're touching. And one man is touching what he is certain is a very big snake, a python perhaps. Another man reaches out and he touches what he is certain is a sword. Third man, a very large leaf. And then a fourth man, the column of a building. A fifth man, a very large water tank. And then a final man, a broom that he remembers his mother using when he was a child. And they're all arguing with one another. They're all certain that they know the truth. And then the guru almost magically is able to open their eyes, and they see that what is before them is an elephant. They were all wrong. The one certain he was touching a snake is touching the elephant's trunk. The one certain he was touching a sword, one of the tusk. The leaf is the elephant's ear. The column of the building, the elephant's leg. The water tank, the elephant's belly that is full of water, but certainly not a water tank. And then lastly, the tail of the elephant is what the last blind man mistook as his mother's broom. So this parable is used to bring about humility in Hindu identity, that you cannot be certain that your own personal experience is absolute truth. It is simply that which you have experienced. And so we do have a commitment to pluralism rather than exclusivism. But strangely, and primarily because of the tensions with Islam, we have seen Hindu fundamentalism arise in India, and those two terms put together an oxymoron. If you don't know what an oxymoron is, it's when you take two seemingly opposite terms and you put them together. Most well-known example is probably little giant. I mean, what does that mean? A giant is something that's huge, and if you call something a little giant, what exactly is that communicating? Well, Hindu fundamentalism doesn't seem to make any sense either, because Hindu is to be so pluralist and open to other traditions, whereas fundamentalism is saying only our tradition is right, and even willing to be militant to protect that tradition. And of course, that's also an oxymoron, because the Hindu tradition is committed to pacifism. So this Hindu commitment to pacifism and pluralism, and then you couple that with fundamentalism, which is this, militant certainty that only your group has the absolute truth, is a strange phenomenon that has arisen in India. And again, the primary reason that this has come about is because Hindu, especially the younger Hindu generation, is feeling threatened by continuing tensions with Pakistan. So even though that border was put in place to try to keep peace between the two, the conflicts in the Indus River Valley and the Punjab region of India do continue. And these gentlemen pictured here at the bottom right are examples of that Hindu fundamentalism. You can see one there holding a very sharp object and threatening violence. And again, this is a reaction against what the threat of Islam in northwestern India. And because of the rise of this Hindu fundamentalism, we had the Hindu government actually come together. I'm sorry, the Indian government actually come together to give an official Hindu identity. So make sure you take a little time on this slide to see these seven really staples of what it is to be Hindu. Number one, we talked about those holy books, the 4 volumes of the Vedas. And so to be Hindu, your spirituality, your religion must be based upon the Vedas. And then number two, tolerance for others based upon the conviction that truth has many sides. And that goes back to our parable of the elephant. And then looking again at our gods of Brahman and Vishnu and Shiva, the understanding that reality is in that constant cycle of creation, which is what Brahman does, maintenance, which is what Vishnu does, and destruction, which is what Shiva does. And remember, destruction is not negative within Hindu culture. It is necessary so that a new creation can take place. Belief in reincarnation, that's quite simple, as a conviction for Hindu identity. And then there are many paths to salvation. That ties into the tolerance on point number 2. And then there are others outside of Sanatana Dharma that consider all of the statues and paintings of the gods and goddesses to be the same as idolatry. And idolatry is any time that you have a picture, an image, a statue of a god, and because you can therefore handle the god or goddess with your hands, the idea is that you can somehow control or manipulate the god or goddess and make him or her do things for you. And this charge of idolatry is something that Hindus vehemently deny, that they do not have the statues and the pictures and the images in order to manipulate or control the gods, but in order to revere them. So it was very important in establishing this Hindu identity that they make this statement that their faith is not idolatrous. And then lastly, Sanatana Dharma as a religion can never be subsumed under a single set of philosophical concepts. And what we mean by that is that there is no man-made philosophy, okay, no human-constructed philosophy that could ever be placed as an umbrella over the religion Sanatana Dharma and explain the religion strictly in philosophical terms. The important point trying to is being established here is that you can never have a human-made philosophy be more important than the religion, because the religion was given, of course, by the gods and the goddesses. And so that's simply what that point is making. Never put a human-made philosophy atop a God-given religion. And Sanatana Dharma has done fairly well in its expansion to the West, although not so much in its most popular form that we have in India. As I've mentioned a few times to you, in India, the most popular form of practicing Hinduism is Bhakti Yoga, which is the very emotional, romantic love shown toward a god or goddess. And because that is tied into many stories that for Western ears sound bizarre, if you looked at the story in your textbook of Hanuman the monkey warrior, I'm sure that story sounded quite bizarre to many of you. And because Western readers do find these stories with animals that can communicate in the same language as the people quite strange, we see that Bhakti Yoga doesn't really take hold in the West, Western Europe or the United States. But in fact, it is the more mystical, meditative forms that really get anchored in Western culture, such as Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga that we looked at on the previous lecture. And so please get down in your notes the most well-known Hindu organization that has thrived in the West. It is ISKCON, and I do need to give you the spelling out here of what this means. ISKCON, I-S-K, is International Society for Krishna. Okay, that's the I-S-K, International Society for Krishna. And then the C-O-N means consciousness. So ISKCON is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And of course, Krishna is the embodiment or incarnation, one of the embodiments or incarnations of the god Vishnu. And this also ties in with the Transcendental Meditation movement, which is simply another way of practicing Raja or Jnana Yoga. Of course, those both really rely heavily upon meditation. Okay, so that's going to do it for Sanatana Dharma. And again, I hope by Wednesday to have the lecture on Jain Dharma up. And then going into the weekend, if I can get the first one on Buddha Dharma up, we'll be moving along very well. Continue to check the announcements regularly because that's where you'll see assignments posted.